Hello, everybody, and welcome to Stewarts Soundbites. This is a big day for us because it's the 50th episode of Soundbites, and I feel like I've aged about 50 years since I started the series. And when I look back at the early days, actually, I do look a bit more haggard and don't fit into the clothes that I was wearing in those early days. But there we go, the joys of lockdown. So thank you all so much for joining us today. 50 episodes in, all the previous episodes are available online. If you feel so inclined, you can have a listen. But we're here to talk today, and I'm so thrilled to have you. Nick, thank you so much for joining us because everybody's in for a real treat. So Nick is a chartered physiotherapist and has over 20 years, not giving away your age, Nick, of working in elite sport. And Nick, you do a lot of teaching and stuff, don't you, as well, Nick? And you do some expert work within sport, and you have many talents and are very experienced. So we're really lucky to have you today. And we're going to talk a little bit about kind of serious injury in sport and concussion and all that stuff. Is really topical at the moment. So thank you, Nick. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, well, look, it's thank you ever so much for the invitation. I do feel kind of honoured, and congratulations to yourself, Emma, and to Stewarts for hosting 50 podcasts. These things don't often keep going, so it shows you've got a loyal audience that keep you going to this far.
Kudos for them for putting up with me. So it's the people like you that want to say, not me, Nick, but thank you. So I wanted to start off and talk a wee bit about you, because I was saying to you before this that I had to listen to a podcast that you did before just about kind of your career and your life, and it's just so interesting. So I thought if you just give us a little taste of kind of your background, if you don't mind, Nick.
No, thank you. I kind of qualified as a physio in a year's time. It will be 30 years, so 29 years ago. Did a very short amount of work within the NHS, but then sort of went into professional football and kind of had the majority of 20 years moving from club to club. So often kind of leading them sports medicine and physio departments. So over the years, I've spent a lot of time with clubs. I mean, one of the ones I was at longest was West Bromwich Albion. I've been working at Bolton, at Fulham, a variety of different places. I had 3 years working with the England under-21s, so I worked with them, which was exciting. When I'd finished at Bolton in 2010, I then went abroad for 3 years. So I worked in Abu Dhabi in the UAE. For the football club who Sheikh Mansour, who owns Man City, for his club over in the UAE, wow. Which was a great experience because like we were in the Asian Champions League. So I've been to some different countries that I wouldn't normally get the opportunity to go. I've done work with rock bands, I've worked with rugby teams, and done some other sort of media sort of events. So I was involved in the Super Cycle in 2008, which was Alan Shearer and Adrian Charles cycling from Newcastle to the One Show studio where he was presenting, but via West Brom. So I spent a lot of my time sort of saying yes to different things. So that's given me a lot of variety and learning different experiences.
We need to take a leaf out of your book, Nick, and say yes to opportunities, because it obviously takes you very interesting places. You've done so much, and I want to ask you more about you know, all of your celebrity pals and kind of the insider knowledge, but we don't have time for it, so I'm not going to do it right now. But just turning to the topic that we're on today, obviously, I wanted to talk a little bit about injury in sport, obviously, and I think probably as sport has kind of evolved over time and changed, and you know, rules have changed, regulations and policies have all changed and stuff. First of all, as kind of a bit of background, I wanted to talk about what are the kind of most common serious injuries that you see in sports? What sports do we see them in, and has it changed over the years?
Yeah, I think the one thing that's really happened, I mean, most of my career has been in professional football, but in my sort of, if you like, medical legal or expert witness work has tended probably to be more in rugby in later years. You know, thankfully, improvements in sports medicine and the improvement within sports science and fitness generally means that often some of the events and some of the basic kind of bits of treatment are better. So your kind of soft tissue muscle injuries, they still take the same amount of time, but the amount of science and support that goes into them is better. What tends to happen is because people are fitter, sharper, more agile, sometimes the collision injuries can be the ones that are worse. So sometimes some of the cruciate ligament injuries, fractures can be worse. But I guess really one of the things that's developed, which I know is obviously part of the topic that we're talking about, is more concussion injuries.
Yeah.
And it's been one of those things that's really, I think previously it was always just expected that was part of the game. I think what's changed now is people seeing it as in, was it predictable that people are going to get concussive injuries and how it affects later life? And I think those are the things that have really changed. Is it's more about the how we view athletes that have been doing professional sport, whether that's football, rugby or anything else. And I think that's the bit that's changed the most.
Yeah, and what I found really interesting when we talked before, Nick, was the introduction of new and different types of sports. So I think you mentioned to me a British bobsleigh kind of sport and skeleton sport. I maybe got that completely wrong, but you talked to me about kind of the evolution of different sports, and because there's those kind of more unusual sports that have come to the fore, I suppose, and we've then seen a corresponding rise in injuries.
Yeah, absolutely. I did a report a few years ago now where it was someone that was a skeleton bob athlete. I don't quite know the term for skeleton bob. So they'd suffered a head injury because there'd been a crash and there'd been an adverse event. But it's difficult to sort of go, if you're hurtling down a ski run on essentially not much more than a tea tray, then the potential is quite high to get an injury, whether it's a head injury or anything else. Yeah. And I think that's the bit, I guess, really from the expert witness work, which is interesting, is where you would go, what's kind of predictable and what's something that someone could have done something to prevent. Yeah. And I think the big thing that really happens is, generally speaking, within sports medicine, protocols are better and legislation and rules are there to protect. And I think that's what's really changed. But realistically, that's probably only changed in more recent times. Yeah. I think whilst everyone knew about it, no one really was doing that much research or effort. And certainly that's where a lot of the kind of rugby cases and things like that now are changing the landscape for how these are going to be viewed in the future.
Yeah. And is rugby the kind of the most common, I'm turning now to talk about concussion then, Nick, just because you've led me into it so nicely. Is that where you see the most kind of concussion cases in rugby or in those contact sports, I guess?
Yeah, I think what's happened is mental health and sort of progressive illness or that sort of mental condition. I think those are the kind of things that have come to the front. I think obviously with rugby, there is that kind of repeated trauma that becomes the big issue. Coincidentally today, and we were mentioning it just before, is it's the 20th anniversary since the great Jeff Astle, who was a football player for West Bromwich Albion. And he suffered with a lot of mental health and sort of dementia type illnesses towards the end of his life. And his daughter, Dawn, who picked up the mantle about it, that actually she felt that a lot of his issues that he had in later life were because of heading what was an old fashioned sort of really heavy football. And realistically, her sort of awareness and pressure that she was putting on authorities actually has prompted a lot of the changes that are now happening within professional football. I think rugby has always had a slightly different view on it and probably been ahead of football because it's the prevalence of head injuries is greater. But you see now that within rugby, there's the if in doubt, set it out type thing, that sit it out kind type, that approach, and also like the head case guidelines for amateur as well as professional rugby, that, there's protocols about assessment and then return to play. But even, in the last few months within professional football, at a junior level and young age groups, the amount of heading they're going to do is being limited quite severely, because now we're seeing that maybe the repeated head injuries, which are only tiny traumas over a period of number of years, if someone's going to play a lot of football or a lot of rugby, they're the thing that might eventually make a difference when you're in your 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And that view of people outside of their sport, that's a massive change.
Yeah. And I suppose that kind of identifying those signs later in life maybe has contributed a lot to the prevalence that we're seeing now. It's not, is it your view that it's not necessarily the case that there are more concussions, but that we're seeing them more because, as time goes on, we recognize that people are showing these symptoms, that actually we could be looking at this much earlier? Do you think it's more to do with that rather than there being an actual increase in the number of cases, or both?
I think it's tricky to know, because I don't think there's always been the clear numbers and figures, and particularly not tracking people over the course of their lives. I think it's easy to kind of track it when they're playing.
Yeah.
I think one of the bits that's really happened, and obviously there's large cases being discussed within rugby union and rugby league about that sort of retrospective, the retrospective head injuries. I think the big thing with that is actually the legal cases are the thing that eventually change policies and protocols, because it's only when there's a liability that has to be compensated for, the legal challenge then makes people think, wow, we've got to have to do something about this, because we can't keep paying out for these industrial type injuries if you're an elite athlete. And that's the thing that changes, like, the next generation of sports people. I think from my experience as an expert witness, one of the big things that I've kind of learned over the years, and I've been doing this quite a few years now, is actually you have to kind of take yourself out of where you're at the time and look back to what the rules were at the time of the events. So sometimes, you know, as things are evolving, how I'd view something to do with a head injury today may be very different from someone who suffered a head injury 5 or 10 years ago, because you have to kind of view it in the context of what was happening at the time. And I think that's the thing that's changing, but the medical legal cases are shaping that.
That's so interesting, and it kind of changes how we think about negligence in a way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Then and now, and it's really interesting. I mean, we have a sports injury team at Stewarts. I don't do sports cases, but I imagine that there are particular challenges when it comes to kind of identifying where the negligence is. So I guess the challenges are going to be kind of delay in diagnosis and that sort of thing, and kind of the retrospective nature of doing that. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, I've done some work on several occasions with Stewarts, and particularly sort of Barrington Atkins has been the link that I've had previously, because he's very well connected within the football world. And I think things like that there's often challenges that happen where a rehabilitation doesn't go according to plan, or someone has to retire early. And I think the opportunity is there for people to question, did I receive the right treatment? Was it appropriate? Was it following the current guidelines, or, you know, the technology? And I think sometimes like that, that's where it's important to, in my opinion, to get an expert witness that's been in those shoes. So, you know, I've been a football physio where you are the major decision maker. Obviously, any clinical decision will be in conjunction with the player, you know, the management, coaching staff, the doctor, the consultant, depends. But actually, all of that being put together, you know, if you're taking that responsibility, you kind of have to then appreciate that there are pressures on you, maybe to get someone on the field because you've got a big game coming up. Maybe it's a question of where they are in their contract, as to, are they forcing themselves to try and earn a new contract or a move to another club? So it's a complex and tough world to be in. But then I would hope that if someone is challenged legally, that someone like myself will at least have a fair and reasonable opinion, to give people, you know, a fair opinion of whether what was happened was appropriate or not. Yeah,
it's interesting that you say that, Nick, about kind of having that extra layer of knowledge, I suppose, in relation to the expert side of things. Do you think that translates to a treating team? So if we've got any case managers or anything watching, if you've got a client who's sustained an injury, a brain injury, or other type of serious injury as a result of sports, do you think that it's helpful to have an experienced physio with a background in sports dealing with that person?
I think it depends on the context of the case. I certainly think that what I would say is it's about being credible. So for me, is that if I've dealt with rugby and football injuries and head injuries in the past and are aware of the protocols, I have some form of credibility to feel like I can give a reasonable opinion. If it was a head injury that was more sort of neurological or something that happened in a home, I probably would say, look, that's not my area of expertise. Yeah. But I think there are experts out there like me who work in those environments. So I do think there's a lot that can be offered, because hopefully you have that reasonable judgment. All I would say whenever there's a case like that is, with hindsight on all the cases I've looked back on and whether I've worked with a team that have either been successful or not successful, part of the thing is I've actually got a lot of faith in what we've done, where you go, do you know what? The right judgment comes out overall. And I think it is important to have some sympathy and empathy for those people in that environment, but then to give a reasoned argument that is backed up with hard evidence. And I think that's the bit where getting the right expert witness for the right case or the right complaint, I think that's the big key that I would really think is really important.
Yeah. What I've always wondered, Nick, is about these kind of sideline concussion assessments, because you hear about kind of, you know, players being taken off and these kind of assessments going on the sidelines. How effective are those, and have those changed over the years?
Definitely rugby's the thing that is further ahead than football in that instance, where you have that opportunity to have a head injury assessment where a player then is taken away from the field. They can put on a replacement whilst they're making that assessment, and then the judgment is either they come back on or they stay off. I think within football, there's been a lot of discussion around that, and they're certainly taking that seriously and moving towards that. I think that will be probably something that will come through in time, because you need time to assess someone when you're doing it under the lights of the TV cameras, and there's so many fans, and there's, you know, there might be a key area within the game. You know, there's a lot of pressure on a medical individual, whether that's a physio doctor or anything else, to make that call. And really, you need to do it out of the glare when things have calmed down, being really objective, because it is about the safety of the athlete at the end of the day. That's the key point. The team comes second, but sometimes that's really difficult to do in the heat of battle. So the head injury assessments have got much better. There are a lot of regulations around that. I think rugby's in a more mature place with their regulations, but it's constantly evolving, and there's loads of research, for example, with saliva testing in rugby players as to whether they've had head injuries. So there's loads of exciting research going on, but that takes time to come out to be validated, and whether that's actually something that can monitor people in the future. But it certainly looks very positive.
Yeah, well, I wanted to end with this because something's popped up in the Q&A box, and it's from one of our partners in London, actually, in the international injury team, Chris Deacon, and he said, not so much a question, but a kind of comment. It says the point about legal cases driving safety improvements is really interesting. As in the motorsport cases I've been involved in, safety improvement is one of the biggest drivers for our clients, and to an extent, I suppose that's quite sad, but it's about kind of learning along the way and learning from lessons, and it's evolving, isn't it, as you've said, Nick? But I'm going to stop rambling because it's 18 minutes past now, and I always go over time. I've been doing it for so long, and I still can't get the 15 minutes nailed on. But that's partly your fault, Nick, because you're so interesting. So I just wanted to say a big, big thank you so much. I find that fascinating, and I could talk to you about it all day. But I'm very grateful to you. And for anybody that wants to know anything more about it, please do feel free to send me an email, any questions you have, because we don't have enough time in the session to deal with lots of questions. We'll also put Nick's contact details on the end slide on the recording, so if you need to get in touch with him, he's great on Twitter. Have a good look through his Twitter page, and thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll see you really soon. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks very much, Emma.
Thanks, bye.
Bye-bye.